On today's episode of The Nikhil Hogan Show, we talk to Jeremy Monteiro, accomplished and acclaimed jazz pianist, composer, producer, vocalist, and educator. We talk about his development from an early age, working with some of the biggest names in jazz, his approach to improvisation, his take on the great pianists in history, and his fine work with the Jazz Association Singapore, and much, much more. Stay tuned, you're listening to The Nikhil Hogan Show. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Nikhil Hogan Show. What a treat. We have the acclaimed and very much accomplished Jeremy Monteiro joining us for the show today. Jeremy Monteiro is a jazz pianist. He's a composer, a producer, a vocalist, and an educator. He's been a professional musician since 1976 with more than 40 solo albums to his name. He's an accomplished jingle writer. He's written more than 700 commercial jingles. And he's received Singapore's highest honor in the arts, the Cultural Medallion, in 2002. He's performed with James Moody, Ernie Watts, Simon and Garfunkel, so many people, and so many great venues all over the world. Ronnie Scott's, the Mainstage of Montreux, EFG London, and many, many jazz festivals. He's a fellow of London College of Music and a visiting professor of the University of West London. He's the executive director of the Jazz Association Singapore and managing director of his company, Showtime Productions, which is 30 years old this year, 2018. Congratulations, Jeremy. 30 years is quite an achievement.
Yes. Thanks, Nikhil. Great to be on your show.
You know, I was listening to an interview you did previously, and it mentioned, is it true you failed O-level music?
Yes,
That's unbelievable.
Well, not so unbelievable since Einstein failed math, right? I mean, I'm not comparing myself with Einstein, but
Either that's a severe indictment of music education in general. When one of the most accomplished musicians to come out of Southeast Asia fails, it's telling us that there's something's a little bit off with music education.
I don't think so much that. I think it's me being a really lazy guy when I was a kid. And also, I mean, the parts of it I was very interested in. For example, we were studying and dissecting Beethoven's Second Symphony in D. And I did really well with that. But then when it came to the history part, about the classicals, I just was that interested at the time, So
right.
I think it was definitely more my fault than anything to fail O-level music. But I really enjoyed the lessons pertaining to score reading and dissecting. Yeah.
Are you a good reader?
Actually, I think I'm a above average reader. I wasn't always a good reader when I was in a music and drama company big band. I was actually a very slow reader and also a very slow writer. I was learning how to write big band arrangements. And what happened was that if I made too many mistakes with the arrangement, or if I made too many mistakes sight reading music, I would get extra guard duty on the weekend.
Oh, wow. That's pretty fierce.
So, I didn't want to miss seeing my girlfriend. So I got really good at reading and really good at not making mistakes on my arrangements very quickly.
How did you improve your reading? You just did it. Is that right?
I just did it. And, now because I don't read so much like two-handed, I can get a bit rusty. But if, let's say, I'm going to do a particular show where I need to play like new music, I just have to prepare a little earlier because it's not that easy. Like reading lead sheets and stuff like that, I can still do pretty fast. But it's like two-handed stuff that sometimes takes a little bit of time and preparation rather than sight reading.
When did you start, actually? When did you actually start playing piano?
I started playing the piano when I was I was 6.5 years old. So yeah, and then I started working like exactly 10 years later at 16.5 years old.
So those lessons, were they classical lessons?
Yes, I actually studied 8 years of classical piano. No regrets. I didn't always enjoy it. There was a point when I hated my music lessons so much that I actually went out to my father's motorcycle when I was learning how to use the pedal and putting on the motorbike and deliberately burning my leg against the hot engine so I wouldn't have to practice.
You're kidding me.
And
wow.
So that's how I hated it. There was a point I hated it. And running into the house saying, "Hey, Mom, I burned my leg. I can't practice." So she tended to the wound, and after that she said, "Are you feeling better now?" I says, "Yes." And then she says, "Okay, now you can go and practice, but you don't have to pedal." But that perseverance really helped a lot because a lot of people give up.
It feels like you're this very much a musical talent, but it just feels like, in spite of the classical training, you still went on, you still loved music, and you still went on to be a great musician.
Yeah, well, the thing that made me change my mind was, here I was living in Sabah, in Kota Kinabalu in Sabah, and my father was working there for a couple of years. And how would I know that I would meet my most influential piano teacher, a wonderful classical piano teacher, who was one of the first master's degree piano performance graduates, Mr. Tan Zi Tong in Kota Kinabalu, and he made me fall in love with music, and that's amazing.
What did he do? Why was he different?
Well, he was different because, most teachers, they don't really know how to do what they're teaching. So they just talk. But this guy, whatever he was showing you, whether it was technique or how to phrase or how to play more expression, he could actually show me an A and B without expression, with expression. Now listen to me play. And he could show me. And I think the ability of teachers in the music scene, maybe in other disciplines as well, of a teacher being able to show you and not just tell you what to do, is a great plus. So even when I teach now, I make sure that if I'm trying to teach something to a student, that I can show them what I'm talking about.
Now, you mentioned in one interview you had a very inspirational military band and music director, Brother Joseph Guan. Is that right?
Yes, in Singapore. When I came back from Sabah and went to SGI for my secondary, there was a brother Joseph Guan who I'm still friends with. He's now no longer a brother. He's actually education. He's got a doctorate in education, so he's Dr. Joseph Guan now. He was great because he made me really enjoy not just the music lessons that we got in class, but being part of the band.
What did you play actually in military band? You didn't play piano,
trumpet,
right?
No, I played trumpet.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I still actually pull out my trumpet twice a year to practice so I don't forget the fingering.
At what point did you start to listen? Now, a lot of people can't believe this, but there was a time before the internet and there was a time before Spotify. And how did you listen to music in those days?
Yes, one day they'll look back at the time continuum and laugh at all of this because, when I grew up, nowadays actually you have radio DJs and I pass them CDs and they say, oh, can you just send me, just let me take a picture of the album cover and go look for it on Spotify. Can you send me the files?
How did you listen to music and how did you find new music?
Back then there were no CDs even, right? So it was records and even 8-track tapes. It was 8-track cassettes, not even the micro cassette or the small cassette that everyone became familiar with.
Right.
And it was records. My father had a wonderful record collection of jazz records, Oscar Peterson and Joe Pass, and
wow, you had jazz. So you, as a young kid, you were already exposed to these heavyweights.
Yes. My dad had a great record collection. My dad used to actually, when I was like 4, 5, 6 years old, he was he had just left being a policeman, but while he was a policeman, he used to also moonlight as a jazz guitarist and a Hawaiian guitarist.
So did he teach you any theory and any how to
Not
improvise?
theory. We used to jam. I had very good ears from very young, so he used to.
Do you have perfect pitch?
I don't have perfect pitch. Now as I grow older, I find myself almost having learned perfect pitch, but really I don't claim to have perfect pitch.
So you have very strong relative pitch, right?
Yes, I do. Yes.
You jammed with your dad. How did that work out? So did you copy? Did he teach you licks, or were you taking
when I
things
was
from the
like
album?
4 or 5 years old, I used to play on a little toy piano, and then one day, my dad had used to rehearse with his band in the house, right? And there was a Fafisa electric organ back then. The Fafisa was the portable organ, and then so then one day during a break, I actually got into the stool of the organ and I played a simple tune with 2 hands, And then my dad's friend said, "Hey, Monty, you better sell this organ and go buy your son a piano." And that's what he did. My dad's nickname was Monty, so he sold the organ and bought a piano, and the brand of the piano was one of the first China-made brands, was called the Blessing. And what a blessing it is, because that's really what I ended up doing,
Funny you mentioned the organ, because you actually do play the organ, right?
Yes, well, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, my dad bought a Hammond organ as well. So from 13 years old till 18, 19, I actually had both a piano and an organ. So I didn't just pick up the organ. I actually, not only did I learn the organ at the time, I actually went for Hammond organ teacher training. So I went to learn how to teach the organ as well. So
one thing about the organ that is interesting in the classical field is it seems to be the only classical instrument where they still actively teach improvisation. Is that what happened to you? Did you have any instruction in
no,
that?
I guess when it came to learning the organ, I didn't learn classical organ. I learned more or less pop organ from the Hammond Music School at City Music had at the time. So then I didn't learn. So I actually am not aware that they teach improvisation for classical organists. It's quite interesting to hear actually.
I wanted to ask you, when it came to improvisation, it strikes me that you're like you really feel the music first. Is that right?
Yes, of course. I learned all later on. I really learned a lot from just listening, and having the music around me all the time allowed me to learn a lot of the things I do by osmosis almost. And just later on, I kind of forced myself. I forced myself to learn the available note scale and some of the jazz theory because I was appointed a professor, visiting professor at La Salle. So I basically felt that, my goodness, how I don't know how to articulate what I do. So I actually go back and learn the theory so I can teach the students. So it was very funny.
Now, when you were 16, when you started playing professionally, what kind of gigs were they?
Well, the first gig I had was as a solo organ gig, playing the Yamaha Electron organ. And because I was only 16 and a half years old, I couldn't go to the gig on my own at that time. It was against the law. So my father used to come every evening with me. Well, he used to drop me off and sit at the bar every evening. For, the 2 or 3 months I was working at the Country Club Hotel. He became friends with the owner. I still remember the owner's name was Mr. P.C. Tan, and when you get older, you remember all the old details, but you can't remember what you had for lunch yesterday, right?
That's right.
Then he used to sit at the bar, and then my mom will say, okay, make sure you bring Jeremy home, before all the strange girls start appearing for the late part of the evening. I was playing during
of course. Now, what was the music scene like, and what was the level of musicianship in Singapore like when you started? Who were the people you admired, and did you have any mentor figures, and when you were a young professional?
Well, at first, it was not so easy as a 16-and-a-half-year-old boy. When I started working, as band, even when I was band leader, when they had the jam sessions, there was like, I used to wait in line to get my turn to play, But even back then, I was already admiring the guitar playing of the late Martin Pereira, who joined my band for a while when I was band leader at the Club 392.
Why was Martin Pereira good? Could you give a quick description of Martin Pereira?
Well, firstly, he was the music director at EMI Records, working under Reggie Verghese. So basically, he was very well qualified. He could write great arrangements. He could play the guitar in any style. And I think he's like our Tommy Tedesco. He was like a Tommy Tedesco.
That Reggie Verghese, I read an interview where he actually he cussed you out. Is that right?
Yeah. He did.
What happened
But
there?
when you're young, you're pretty turned off by all kind of thing. But when you get older and you think holistically, about your life and even your relationships with people who were less than savory,
you guys became good friends.
Yeah, we became good friends. And I mean, when I think about the things I learned from him, it's like I couldn't, because he was the only producer in Singapore who was trained in Abbey Road. He actually was sent by EMI to train how to be a producer at Abbey Road back in the early 70s. Then, can you imagine learning? I mean, I didn't get a chance to learn from Abbey Road, but learning from someone who studied it, So, and not just him, but the wonderful engineer Vincent Lim, who recorded all those hit records in the 70s for EMI, and Martin Pereira, who showed me how to be a music director, how to write charts for recordings, and so on and so forth. So he joined my band. Actually, he wanted to join for a short time only when my guitarist Yusuf passed away, right? He wanted to actually just come and join us for a little while, but and buy a new guitar. So he thought 6 months' salary, I can buy a really expensive guitar. He wanted to buy. Remember, he wanted to buy a Martin guitar. It was at that time they were very expensive, and he wanted to buy a handmade one. And but then he liked the band so much, he stayed all the way until I left at the end of 1978 and had to go to the army.
You said you started 76, right? So you were playing for 2 years and then you went into the army. Were you a soldier in the army, or were you in the music? Did they have a music band in the army at that point?
Well, what happened was, when I went into the army, they couldn't really find my file. Back in the days, there was no computer.
Oh no.
And so I was supposed to do basic military training and then, and then go into the music and drama company immediately.
Okay.
But then they lost my file. So then they said, oh, Montero, okay, a lot of doctors and nurses in Singapore, Monteiro. So off you go to the School of Military Medicine. So that first week, I'm in the School of Military Medicine. I saw blood and I fainted. Great start, huh? So then after I finished my training and I passed out besides passing out after seeing blood, I passed out as a medic, right?
Yeah.
I got my Geneva Convention card and the right to draw a red cross on my helmet, which basically means X marks the spot for the enemy.
Yeah, for snipers, of course.
So then I went to a camp, I think like 5 SIR, I think, for 1 week. Then they found my file and came and said, oh, you're meant to go to the music and drama company. So off I went. But I had no regrets. I enjoyed the training. In the end, I really learned so many things in first aid and pharmacology and kind of stuff. Is great.
Now, let me ask you, you didn't start out as a jazz pianist, right? Were you playing pop gigs or were you already playing jazz at 16?
Yes, I was, but I think back then, there wasn't really anyone to measure myself against as a jazz musician, except for the older guys. And I mean, my hero at the time was David Ng, who came from Penang but spent a lot of time in Singapore, and he was kind of regarded as being one of us.
Talk about him, David Ng. Give a few sentences to describe him.
Well, he really was like to me, one of the two pianists in Asia who sounded like Oscar Peterson. So there was David Ng in Malaysia and Singapore, and then there was Booby Chan, who was the hero in Indonesia, who I actually got a chance to record a 2-piano album with, in the 80s.
When you were younger, was David Ng a mentor to you?
Well, I would ask him questions, but he's bass player, actually.
Oh, no kidding. And he plays like Oscar Peterson.
Yeah, Frisco Soliano, right? One of the people from the famous Soliano family, He used to, actually, after his gigs, we used to go to the Chatterbox at Marriott Hotel, and he used to stay up to 5 in the morning, and Frisco used to write on even on the napkins or whatever, like alternate chords for tunes or chord substitutions. And I mean, Frisco actually, when I think back, was a great mentor. Another great mentor was the owner of City Music, Willie Ho, who's pretty much now his son has taken over the shop, but he was a great teacher to me, because City Music used to be next door to SJI, St. Joseph's, where I was studying. So after school, I would run down Queen Street and go and jam with my friend Hilarion Goh. We had a house and with all the instruments, drums, piano, organ, and we used to jam. Then I would run, instead of studying, going off to study and doing my homework, then I would run over to City Music and play on the pianos and play on the Hammond organs. And at the time he had a Woodlitzer piano and Fender Rhodes pianos and all. And then Willie Ho used to come out, and sometimes in a bad mood, he would tell me, come on, tone down, you're making too much noise. But other times when he was in a good mood, right, he would sit down with me and say, okay, now, you see, you play this song, you're voicing it like this on the piano. You cannot voice it like that on the Fender Rhodes because it sounds too muddy. Now, this is how you voice the same chord on the Fender Rhodes. And then he used to go and he teach me, and he was a good organist as well. And, it's been 50 years since the formation of City Music, but I would say that in my harmonic attitude and the way I voice my chords and so on and so forth, I owe a great debt to Willie Ho, City Music,
The 70s, right, and the 80s, when you're doing all this, when you're starting out, I guess that's really like the start of like fusion and that kind of sound in the United States, and that kind of, it's starting to, the rock influence is getting into jazz. Were you aware of these trends, or was jazz kind of like, what was the jazz, how was jazz perceived in Singapore? Was it still swing, bebop, cool jazz, or was it all of those things rolled into one?
Back then there wasn't really any acid jazz yet. That was, acid jazz came about a bit later to Singapore. But fusion jazz, Spyro Gyra. Okay, the precursor to Spyro Gyra is Sea Wind, a band out of Hawaii, right? Great band, you should listen to them. And and the singer, her name is Pauline Wilson. She still sings, and that was a precursor to the whole fusion thing, the GRP thing, and so on and so forth. Spyro Gyra, Dave Grusin, Lee Ritenour, and all that. People that actually came about in the 70s. Some of them were playing already in the 70s. So I actually wanted to play with all those people, and I used to say, I want to play with this guy, I want to play with Toots Slimmer, I want to play with Lee Ritenour, and I actually got to play with a lot of those people.
out of all the sounds the influences that are out there, how did you come to your own particular sound?
Well, I don't know. I mean, right now, when I'm kind of an amalgamation of everything I've been exposed to. But, when I'm asked to describe my style, I would say I'm a combination of Ravel and the blues, because I love all the impressionistic harmonies, and a lot of people sometimes listen to me and they don't know what exactly I'm doing, and maybe even feel that I may not be, so much of a valid bebop player, which I don't really consider myself to be. But that combination of just those impressionistic, curious harmonies that I use, which I can explain now. When people ask me, I can say, "What are you doing?" I can tell them this is what I'm thinking, and then I'm actually available playing the available note scale on those kind of, like, I like to use the Phrygian scale a lot.
That's actually a good segue into improvisation. Do you think tonic dominant? Do you think modally, chord scale? What's your way of thinking?
Oh, now I think of nothing. Because if I, the thing is that a lot of the things I learn goes now to my subconscious, and really when I'm playing, I'm just hearing. It's a conscious stream of consciousness, and I'm able to actually hear whatever I hear in my head. That just an instant before my hands move is really hard. But then again, of course, I'm hearing available note scale in my head. I actually give a very interesting talk call, which I'm going to give again in Singapore a couple of times this year, called the 4 primary scales of jazz improvisation.
What are the 4?
Well, to me, the first 4 I like to teach people is the blues scale.
Now, is that the minor pentatonic with the flatted fifth?
Well, the one I'm referring to is like the dominant, and then the minor third, major third, sharp 11, fifth, dominant 7, and then the tonic at the top. So that's the regular blues scale, right? So that's one. And then the second one would be the Dorian scale, which basically is the displaced Ionian scale. I mean, if you think the C major scale and the C major chord, if you play a D minor chord, for example, so then you have a D minor chord, then really you're playing the C Ionian scale, but you're starting on the second tone, which is the D, and then playing from D to D, but really it's a C major scale, starting a tone above the root of C. So D minor, D minor is actually the C major scale starting on the second note. So then, for example, G minor would be an F major scale, but starting on the G. So that's your Dorian scale, right? Not to be mistaken with the Dorian scale, of course.
Of course.
Then the third one would be the diminished scale, right? So like if you start on a G, then the diminished scale is very easy to construct. It's 1 tone, 1 semitone, 1 tone, 1 semitone. So the G diminished scale would be a G.
It's kind of an octatonic scale, right? A whole, half whole.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and then also that's half whole. I mean whole, half, or half whole, depending where you're starting, right? And then of course, then I talk about the half diminished, half whole tone scale, so which is also another thing that's interesting to play. Like if C coming down, you play a C whole tone, whole tone, whole tone to the F sharp, whole tone to the E, and then you do diminished. So you do E flat and then D flat and C. So it's half diminished, half whole tone scale. Very nice to hear as well. And then the last one will be the Lydian scale, right? And Lydian scale, so everyone knows basically if it's a C, then it's an F sharp. And the altered Lydian scale with the dominant 7th as well. So if you, my thing is that if you can master the use of these four scales, you will be able to play almost every single jazz standard known to mankind. You'll be able to improvise, And then you ask me, how do you then develop interesting phrases and so on? And there are 2 ways to do it. Some people actually bother to transcribe. I have to admit that I don't really transcribe.
So you don't transcribe it much?
I don't transcribe whole solos. I transcribe parts that I like. And then I also really, really try and learn the essence of what the improviser was doing so that I can kind of use his essence to then, practice.
What does that mean? Okay, let's unpack that. You said the essence of what the improviser is saying. I can guess maybe, like for instance, let's say there's a Sonny Rollins solo. Are you thinking of the rhythmic complexity of the solo? Is that what you're like? Is that a good example?
Whether the rhythm, but just like his sound, you can kind of go like Chick Corea is probably a good. Like he likes to use a lot of pentatonics and so on and so forth, right? So he likes to use pentatonics. He likes to use the Phrygian scale. So then there's kind of a sound that he gets. That for me, it's a very oral experience as opposed to, trying to look at things. Learning the skills is important. Now, then I always tell my students, especially the young students, right? If you're practicing for an hour a day, you need to be listening for an hour a day. And because learning by osmosis, really just listening and letting those sounds permeate your consciousness and go in and get hard and just keep on going and going until you find that these sounds are in your head. And when these sounds in your head and you start hearing them against the chords that you're seeing, then what's going to happen is that you'll start to recognize immediately, oh, it's a, it's a diminished scale here and it's a Lydian here, and then your hands will start forming, formations, and you learn licks. I mean, like I said, I didn't transcribe whole solos, but I would, if I like a particular lick, I would transcribe it. Then you start hearing, Chick Corea used to say, only play what you hear. Don't play stuff you don't hear in your head. So really, be able to start hearing what you want to improvise before you actually try and play it,
When you are improvising, do you sing along to your lines as you're playing? Because I know Bud Powell, Oscar Peterson, if you look at a jazz player, they're often mouthing along. If in some cases, or like a Keith Jarrett, you quite audibly vocalizing that you can see. Does that happen involuntarily?
Well, Oscar Peterson grunts when he plays.
Yeah, right, that's right.
And Keith Jarrett whines when he plays. So,
right.
But there are some people that actually do kind of sing along. I mean, I worked with Lee Ritenour before, and he actually does kind of sing his lines.
Is that something you do?
No, sometimes. So basically, because I hear it in my head so clearly, I don't need my voice to do it. So I actually hear the tones in my head and I'm playing. So I have a very strong connection with what I hear in my minds.
I listened to an interview with Vladimir Horowitz, and you know how some classical pianists really ape that visual thing where they're leaning backwards and sighing and all of that kind of thing. And he was saying, no, it's all in my hands. So you don't see. I'm not a very expressive pianist because it's all in my hands. I don't need to really do anything externally. I just found that pretty.
If you look at a recording of Vladimir Horowitz playing, right, and you just cover everything except his shoulders and up, he looks like a kindly old man waiting for a bus. And then there's all this great music going on,
It's very interesting. It's very interesting how everyone thinks, because everyone seems to be different. You've played with some of the greats, some of the absolute top of the top, and you wrote a song actually, and I want to talk about in the Mode for Love for Moody. And it was a tribute to your friend, James Moody, one of the greatest saxophone players there were. Could you talk a little bit about your relationship with him and that song as well?
Well, I mean, I met Moody in 1995. When he first came over, I used to own a jazz club called Jeremy's Jazz and Blues Cafe back in 1995. And we did it once in one location and tried a second location. But after 3 years, we had to fold and we lost a lot of money. But we had a lot of fun, so it wasn't that bad. And Moody came and played with us, and he was just wonderful. I mean, he's such a effervescent and a brilliant character, and he kisses everybody. So when you meet James Moody, it doesn't matter who you are, kiss you on both cheeks, right? But he uses this kind of cologne, which the smell lingers for like 5 days. So basically. People can actually, you met James Moody, right? Because you smell of James Moody, this nice cologne smell.
Was there like a big age gap when you met him?
Well, yes. I mean, back then when I met him, I guess he was about late 60s. And I got to play with James Moody from 1995 until he passed away, I think in about 2007 or 8, I can't remember, maybe later, a little bit. But I had 15 years of wonderful friendship and music making with James Moody.
Now, you must have had some very deep conversations with him. I'm so curious. What did you guys talk about when it came to music?
Well, we talked about music, but more we just talked about just like regular friends. Like I remember one time that his wife Linda drove us to the edge of at La Jolla near San Diego, where the beach was, and the sun was setting, and there was a huge Californian sun. You know how the sun always appears very, very much larger than it is on a California coast, And it was, as it goes down the horizon, and it goes below the horizon, and this flash of orange and crimson, right, that happens the moment the sun goes below the horizon over there. And then he turns to me and he says, "Don't ever say I've never done anything with you." So he said, "Don't ever say I've never done anything with you." And that was just a magical, worth the price of being a jazz musician. Just the experience, that very those kind words.
What did he like about your playing?
Well, I don't, he was the only one actually of the many American musicians I brought over to Singapore to invite me to play with him 3 times at BB King's in New York
he
City.
must have obviously loved something about your playing. Did he ever talk to you about like it, or was
I don't know what is specifically that he liked about my playing, but many people do comment because I have, like I said, this approach of infusing very impressionistic, like Ravel type harmonies that not many pianists do, And so that he found there was something unique about my playing. Even today, actually, when I play with certain people, they said, wow, it's great to play with you because you don't sound like anybody. And that's a really big compliment.
I think that originality is something that the old school has, that a lot of the kids, that when they come out from jazz schools, that I think it has something to do with the fact that perhaps you didn't go to one of these schools and you really learned from.
So I don't sound like a clone of Bud Powell, right? I mean, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's nice to spend a little bit of time. In fact, I've been spending more time with Bud now.
Oh, I love Bud. Actually funny you mentioned him. He's my favorite. He's my favorite pianist. Other than that, and Barry Harris. But
and I took lessons from Barry Harris one time as well.
No kidding. Can you?
Yes.
Oh, I'm such a fanboy. Can you tell me how did that go?
Well, it was it was like, he actually gives lessons, or he did anyway. I think I'm not sure if he still does it, but he gives like this long 6-hour lessons in New York, right? And then, the pianist 2 hours, blowers another 2 hours, singers another 2 hours. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And, and just watching him play and watching his approach to harmony, amazing.
He has a very particular idea of what he demands of his students, and some people dig it. I dig it, but I think some people think it's a little bit too strict in some regards. What did you get out of those classes?
Well, to me, I was just looking at the way he was voicing things, and I also then I realized that as much as I love this, because when I went to watch him and take a lesson, take a group lesson with him, I already felt that I think I've developed my own harmonic approach already, and it's great to be exposed to this. And
how old were you when you went for those classes?
When I went for the classes, I was in my 40s already. I was like 45 or something like that.
Pretty much had an established style by then.
Yes, but still, I'm very, very open to listening and inputting a new knowledge, or having listened to someone and discover that maybe there's some shortfalls or the other side of the spectrum, which is to validate what I'm doing.
Talk a little bit about the song that you wrote for James Moody, In the Mode for Love.
Okay, it's very atypical of what people hear of Moody. People never hear Moody really playing very modally. But when I spent time with him in his home back in the early 2000s, we were going to do a big concert together. And I went to his home, and we worked out on what we wanted to do, and we even wrote a song, which I have not actually written a lead sheet of yet, because I have to, because can you imagine having a lead sheet that says music by James Moody and Jeremy Montero?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess everything in its own time, right? Some things I take a long time to do, but we have performed it. We've actually done it in concert before, so there was a very badly scribbled lead sheet, But then he started playing for me all these really interesting modal things. He was working on a Slominski book of scales. And
what's that? That thesaurus of
scales, and with the interpolation of notes and so on and so forth. And he was trying to play those as well as Michael Brecker licks inverted. He used to invert like Coltrane and Michael Brecker licks, right? He said Coltrane used to do this. Now listen to I've been working on inverting the lick, And so
What does that mean? Wait, what does that mean to invert a lick?
Okay, I mean, I don't know whether you can hear my piano's nearby. So like this is a typical Coltrane lick, right? Right? So then what he would do, he would invert it. So basically he would actually invert a Coltrane lick like that. And no one really plays it like that, I guess.
Right.
Well, I do, because I was spending time with him, But
how does that change the underlying? Can you still play it over the same underlying chords?
Yes, exactly. So that, like what I just played, would work with an A minor 7 flat 5 to a D7 flat 9. So then you could play the original Coltrane lick, which actually is from Slominski's Thesaurus of Scales, or you could play it inverted or go ascending and inverted like that, going up the way Moody showed me. So then because he was doing all this, for some reason about 3 months ago, that whole time I spent with him came back in a very lucid memory about what we did. So therefore, I wrote, people will be curious, why did you write a song that's so modal for James Moody, who's more bebop and lyrical in his style, and that's the reason why I was just remembering that time.
And you had quite a remarkable Jacob Dinison, right? Could you just say a few things about the man playing sax on that?
Well, Jacob Dinison, or Dino as his friends call him, is basically we were playing a duo, so we're equal partners in a presentation. And we actually co-leading a group to play at the Copenhagen Jazz Festival this coming July 14th and 15th. And I've known Dino now for about 4 years, and I love his playing. And why I love playing with him is because when I do play with him, whether on the piano or on the organ, I play in a way that I don't play with anybody else. It's like he brings out something musical in me that I feel, for example, I don't play as much as my impressionistic stuff with other musicians, because if, let's say, they're playing bebop, I can use a little bit of it, but I still have to kind of stay pretty much in the tradition. But with Jacob Dinison, I find that I can actually go all out with that impressionistic harmonies, and he's right there with me. He plays the solos, he hears it immediately, and he responds and plays so beautifully on top of all of that. And that's really interesting.
There's a class you teach called The History of Jazz.
It's a 1 hour, 15-minute talk. And what I do is like very quickly talk about the history of jazz from pre-jazz, like ragtime, which isn't improvised. It sounds improvised, but it's not. And into the early blues, where it wasn't 12-bar blues before. There used to be 8-bar blues, 16-bar blues, and all kinds of funny combinations of bar numbers until it settled on the 12-bar blues most of the time. And then going into Dixieland. The New Orleans people don't really like the term Dixieland. They kind of say Dixieland is New Orleans jazz played badly.
Really?
So they don't really like the term. But the New Orleans people always refer to their music as New Orleans jazz.
Okay.
And then basically going into swing and Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, and just playing pieces. So it's almost like a little concert come talk, and it allows people to hear the different styles as best we can with the configuration of a quartet, how the different bands sound, how the music evolved. So it's very it's nice, it's entertaining. I stay light because it's not meant for musicians. It's really meant for people who are curious about jazz, or who listen to one particular kind of jazz and I think that the jazz is jazz, acid jazz, and they want to know how the jazz evolved and get to that and through that. And so that's really what the talk is about. And I have actually did this talk about 60 times in the 80s and 90s, and I reached out to 100,000 school kids. And now I'm doing it like 3 or 4 times a year, and smaller groups, 40, 50 people, and people are interested to know. And it's just part of my mission and using the platform of the Jazz Association of Singapore that I founded with some friends to just try and spread the joy of listening and appreciating jazz.
You do some tremendous work, Jeremy. I want to now do something a little fun. I want to put you on the hot seat, so to speak. I'm going to ask you a list. I'm going to give you a list of pianists, and I want you to give your 3 sentences just to describe how you feel about these pianists. I'm just going to go through a bunch of names, and I'll be curious to hear how you respond to each one. So I'm going to start. Maybe we'll go a bit backwards. How about Art Tatum?
Oh, he's a complete virtuoso, right? I mean, amazing. Not only did he play jazz music, but he played some very amazing interpretations of classical music. He was, I think, one of the most virtuosic pianists of the 20th century.
Nat King Cole.
Not only is he a great pianist, but people know him as a great vocalist, but he was so wonderful and stylish with his playing. He was actually the influence for Oscar Peterson.
Yeah, now Oscar Peterson.
Well, Oscar Peterson is very interesting because he's a little bit like an Art Tatum, and he has the same kind of almost the same dexterity and virtuosity as Art Tatum, but he also had a very bluesy, kind of a really big blues tinge to his style, which I love.
How about Thelonious Monk?
Thelonious Monk, was an absolute genius, not only as a piano player, but as a composer. Such sophistication to go from to try and be cheeky with all those sometimes atonal kind of things, or really dissonant kind of things. One of the first players to really play out.
How about Hank Jones?
Oh, sublime. and just really gorgeous. All the beauty, he was just the epitome of beauty in jazz piano playing, and just one of my favorite piano players. I got a chance to see him live on my 44th birthday, actually.
Wow.
In Los Angeles, yeah.
Bud Powell.
Oh, he was the Charlie Parker of the piano, and really one of the innovators of bebop, the true frontline innovators of bebop, along with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie.
Let's go a little bit later now. Sonny Clark.
Oh, I wasn't a big fan of Sonny Clark. I mean, he was a little bit outside of my style, but during his time was another piano player that I was interested in called Phineas Newborn.
Yeah, talk about Phineas.
Yeah, I mean, he's like the master of locked hands, right? Being able to play with equal dexterity and play, Oscar does that as well, but Phineas really was the master of playing the unison solos.
Red Garland.
He was also, I think he was a kind of a precursor to Hank Jones in a little bit. I mean, he was a little bit younger than Hank Jones, and really that the beauty of his playing is another one of those people with very beautiful, sublime, gorgeous playing,
I kind of went too far. I missed Count Basie and Duke Ellington, so maybe just briefly about Count Basie and Duke Ellington.
Well, Count Basie was a very simple piano player, really a blues piano player rather than a jazz piano player, but his arrangements and his band, my goodness, I think one of the most swinging things that you can imagine hearing.
And Duke Ellington.
Well, Duke Ellington, I think, to me, still my number one jazz composer of all time. I mean, just you think about some of the sophisticated harmonies that he came up with and worked. Of course, he had a very amazing partner in his composition who wrote with him as well as on his own for
Billy Strayhorn, right?
Billy Strayhorn, yes. I love Billy Strayhorn. Billy Strayhorn actually has wrote a tune called Blood Count, which he wrote while in the waiting room of a hospital for his results from his blood test when he was having leukemia.
Wow.
It was very tragic, but
sad.
The song is so deep and amazing. And you imagine writing a masterpiece like that in a waiting room of a hospital.
Was he the one who did he write Take the A Train?
I think you're right. Yes. I always attributed to Duke. That's right. Yeah.
Now, how about let's go a little bit further ahead. Chick Corea.
The thing about it is that I don't realize how much Chick Corea has been an influence to me. But when I look at my record collection, I actually have more Chick Corea albums than any other jazz artist.
No kidding.
Yeah. So, I've got a chance to actually meet him and hang out with him and play on the same concert with him on the same night at the Montreux Jazz Festival. Very nice man too, and I've seen him live playing solo piano, playing with the electric band, and playing, of course, on a concert with his acoustic trio. The same night that he played, I still remember it was the 16th of July, 1988, on the same concert.
Did I leave anybody out? Is there anybody worthy of mention that I missed?
Well, one pianist that's very influential now, I love his playing very, very much, is Brad Mehldau. Basically, his independence of his right and left hand, which actually the precursor to Brad Mehldau being able to play like that, is Jeffrey Keezer, who was with the Ray Brown Trio for a while, and still very active as a piano player. And so Jeffrey Keezer, if you listen to the Ray Brown Trio live at Starbucks, that's Jeffrey Keezer and piano. Is a phenomenal piano player. But Brad Mehldau kind of took that dexterity and the virtuosity of two hands, right, and actually be able to independently play two separate things, almost like they're two musicians. And how he split his brain in two, don't ask me, And of course, a couple of other younger ones, I love Elder Jangirov. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
He's a phenomenal piano player, but he is able to play in all styles, in classical style, in modern jazz style, in bebop, and everything equally well. Check him out. He's called Eldar, Eldar Jangirov, DGARAN. ROV, something like that.
Is he? That's an unusual name. Is he American? Where is he from?
I think his family came from the kind of Balkans area, but he was born in the U.S.
Okay, I see.
So then finally, I want to say, one of my favorite young musicians, great piano players, is Joey Alexander.
Yeah.
Not only is he's like definitely an old soul, being able to play with that kind of depth at the age of 14 years old. I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting and spending time with him a couple of months ago in Thailand when we played the same festival together. And not only is he a great musician, but he's an old soul. He speaks like a he's a child, he's 14 years old, so his mother was still kind of cleaning his mouth when it was dirty when he's eating, but at the same time when he talks, just like Lee Ritenour felt the same way. He said when he talks, you feel like you're listening to an old sage, not a kid talk.
Oh, I forgot Horace Silver.
Horace Silver is amazing, and I love him a little bit more as a composer and a piano player. Not to denigrate all his piano playing, but he wrote such interesting, hip songs that are fun to play and fun to listen to. I mean, you play a song for my father, or Cape Verde Blues, or one of those tunes. It's just like he's just amazing. Fun and funky and swingy at the same time.
Now, I mentioned a lot of pianists. Is there any non-pianist that was really important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I love saxophone players. I really love Dexter Gordon. What
was great about Dexter Gordon?
Well, Dexter had this amazing smoky saxophone tone that just like was almost a quintessential saxophone tone, and I love Stan Getz very much because of his lyricism.
Did you watch that movie Round Midnight where he was acting?
Yes. I actually had Dexter Gordon in the audience when I played one time in Montreux at the jam session. He was on the way out from his dressing room and had to pass by the stage, and he turned to the stage and stood there for like 3 minutes watching us play. So I can say with pride that Dexter Gordon has been to one of my gigs,
Well, I mean, Jeremy, we're talking about all these greats, but you yourself you're really an inspiration to a lot of artists here in Asia. So happy that you've joined us with the show. I want to talk a little bit about this very good work that you're doing with the youth of Singapore in jazz. Could you talk a little bit about the organization that you run to encourage jazz in Singapore?
Well, yes, we started the Jazz Association Singapore with some really good friends of mine. And also very lucky to have as our patron Singapore's ambassador at large, Professor Tommy Koh, and a very well-known banker, Albert Chu, who really has been the driving force in helping us get our funding and so on and so forth. And what we basically want to do is to raise the level of excellence in jazz in Singapore. So we're actually launching our scholarships this year, where we'll send one person to study in the States or anywhere he wants to study overseas, and one person to study at LaSalle. And then we also have this very important linchpin activity called the Lion City Youth Jazz Festival, where we immerse youth musicians in a high-level professional experience. So this year we're actually having Randy Brecker coming and Antonio Hart, and Louis Nash, who is the most recorded drummer in history, will be coming as the drum major. And my favorite bass player in the world, Jay Anderson, is coming as well.
Why is he your favorite bass player in the world?
Okay, very important reason. I can think of many reasons, but the most important reason that he's my favorite bass player in the world. I used to have two favorite bass players in the world, of course, LD Young and Jay Anderson, but LD's passed away now. I would say my favorite living bass player in the world is Jay Anderson, because he makes me play better than I play with anybody else. He lifts me. And I've learned to do that with other musicians. I've learned to also lift musicians.
How do you do that?
Well, basically, when a musician is playing, sometimes you play with a musician maybe who's a little lesser than you. In my case, of course, I'm a lot lesser than Jay Anderson. He plays with Joe Sample, he played with Carmen McRae. But he never makes me feel that. When we played with Toots Tillemans together, he made me feel like I was, and at the least of sounding immodest, but that's not the intention. He made me feel like I was the best piano player in the world, just by the way he lifted me, was listening to me, following me. If I did something harmonically, he would support me either with playing an inversion or something. He was always listening to me, and that's why I love playing with him so much.
I was reading a biography of Charlie Parker, and they were saying that he, just by him being on stage, he made everybody in the band just sound better, and I think that's a real thing. And the way you just described, that's a very important quality that somebody can have on the bandstand.
I think you have to have a very big heart and a generous spirit to do that. And Toots Tillemans was the other one who did that, and he just basically lifted me and made me feel, because I was so nervous to play with him. I mean, he played with Kenny Werner, and those albums were so phenomenal, and so he was so gracious and so on. And so a lot of musicians, even lesser musicians, young musicians, they come back from, studying overseas, and they go to a jam session, and there's someone who's not that much lower in quality or ability than him. And now they kind of give an attitude and give an air and makes the guy feel bad about himself. And then from being able to play a little bit, he starts to sound really bad. So those are the opposite people to Jay Anderson or Toots Tillemans.
If I could quickly just squeeze in one more. You teach classical musicians how to improvise. Improvisation is almost unthinkable in the way they teach classical education now. What steps do you take to unlock this technique and skill set?
Yes, well, you hit the hill on the nail on the head by saying try unlock. And really what I do is unlock and unleash these classical musicians' inner improviser that is already there, just that it's hiding somewhere in their consciousness. And what I do is I tell them about the 4 primary scales, which they all know. They, other than the blues scale, actually very familiar with the rest of the scales, in classical music, and show them how to string them together and to create improvisations and what scales they can use against what chords. And I usually, within like 4 lessons, I have a classical musician actually playing competent blues in at least 4 keys.
So basically, anyone can improvise, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, of course, yeah. I think that all of us can improvise, and it's great to teach people improvisation because improvisation is in music is really just a pathway to people's minds and brains that actually that it actually unlocks the ability to have unlocks the ability to think heuristically and laterally, and just by teaching people improvisation, then they know that their brain is able to look at a situation or a problem, because sometimes you hit a chord, you go, okay, what do I do here? But I can play the scale. So then you also learn to approach problems from different ways and think out of the box. If you learn, even if you never become a professional musician, just learning that will unleash your ability to improvise in life and in situations in life.
Jeremy, you've had a phenomenal career, and we are so blessed that you came onto the show. Where can my audience go to find more about Jeremy Montero?
Well, I actually was very lazy. I haven't had a website online for the last year or so because the server that I had went offline and closed down or whatever. But now I'm back on. Just go to jeremymontero.com, and from there you can go straight, the links to go straight to my music on Spotify, and then some of my non-commercial music on SoundCloud that I share with people, as well as straight to my Facebook, Instagrams. You can actually, there's a link to email me directly. There's a link to my calendar of gigs, and so on. So jeremymontero.com is the best way to get to me.
I really hope you come back on the show. It's been such a delight to talk to you. I mean, you're just a font of wisdom and knowledge, and it would be fantastic. We got to come back because I need to talk about your jingle writing. 700, what is this, 700 jingles commercially written?
Yes.
You could have just had a full career as a jingle writer.
But it's great talking to you, Nikhil, and I love being on your show. And obviously, it's great interviews go by before you even know it. It's almost more than an hour already.
Well, Jeremy, thanks for coming on the show, and please come back soon.
All the best with the show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to my interview with the great Jeremy Montero. Such a thrill to be able to talk music with such accomplished people. I really hope you enjoyed listening to the show. Please take a moment to subscribe, review, and rate the show on iTunes. It would go a long way to helping the show continue to bring on more great guests. Thank you so much, and hope to see you at the next show.